Welcome to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. I am your host, Molly Southgate, and today I'm interviewing
Kimberly Brock.
Hi there. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you, Molly?
I am doing great. I am so excited to chat.
I'm excited too. I've been watching your podcasts and listening, and I'm very honored to be included with this.
That is so kind of you. That's so sweet to hear. So can you tell me a little bit about your writing?
Well, I've just finished my third novel. Comes out in October. I write Southern historical fiction. It's a little bit literary leaning, I guess, book club fiction. My first novel was with a small press. It was called The River Witch. Um, they're all three set on the Georgia coast. And that book won the Georgia Author of the Year award in 2012 or 2013. Don't ask me to do math. I'm a novelist. And then my second novel, The Lost Book of Eleanor Dare, was set also on the Georgia coast near Savannah. Another historical fiction novel. I kind of accidentally ended up writing historical fiction there with that topic. And then this third novel, also set on the Georgia coast. This one is on Cumberland Island, has three female protagonists and two timelines, 1932 and 1959. And it is called The Fabled Earth, and it releases October 1st.
That is fascinating. So what interested you about writing about the South and doing this kind of I like that descriptor of book club fiction. What interested you?
Yeah. So, writing about the South, I know you can't tell just from listening to me talk that I'm from North Georgia. So, I grew up in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in Northwest Georgia, the corner. And I love folk tales. I love music. I love all of the cultural elements of coming from that area and the history of that area. But I also love the southern coast, the low country coast. And so in my books, I end up kind of squashing the two things together and finding the commonalities between those two things. So that would be, I guess, the answer to your question about why southern fiction.
Mhm.
I also think it's a little bit of a love-hate relationship I have with the region that I live in because we have such a difficult and long history. It's very complicated. And I love it dearly, but you cannot write about the beauty of the southern United States without addressing all of that long history as well.
Mhm.
So it's a complicated thing that I think I am unraveling my own feelings about that in my writing. As far as book club fiction goes, I think it's because I want to write books that are approachable, that are stories. I love history, but I think the reason I love history is I grew up with a father who loved history and was able to tell it to us or share it with us through story.
Mhm.
And so when I write historical fiction for book clubs, have book clubs in mind, it's because I want it to be accessible. I want people to be interested in the people, in the stories, and not the academic part of history necessarily, because I'm a storyteller. And I like that if we think about our history, we also dream about our futures. And I think that is a conversation starter. So I think that's why it makes it a good book club book.
That is absolutely so incredible. Such a beautiful answer, and I fully agree. It's like I think that taking histories like that and making it more accessible to people that maybe aren't actively in a history class at the time is so important, and you can learn about topics that may not be covered in other areas of life for sure.
Right.
So,
Well, it's about empathy too. I think it
mm,
helps you connect. It helps you connect to the stories as a human story. And it doesn't matter what time period or even in what region you're reading about. If it's a human story, you can connect to that as a person living today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, with that being said, what did your research process look like?
Well, for this book, in particular, I was drowning in research because Cumberland Island is, the history there is very long, and it is our southernmost island off the coast of Georgia. So you're walking around a place that has known all of the history of North America, and you can see remnants of that. And then all of the things that I was learning, it seemed like every few generations, there's a group of people that would want to call this place home, that would establish this place as home. And then that history would roll over, it would be a new group of people that would come in. So you had the indigenous people who lived there, and then you had the European people who came, and there were missions built, churches built, wars fought, and it was just this constant wave over and over and over again of a place that is still relatively wild today. And you find all the things there that you would expect in that long history. You find the remnants of old plantations, so there's that history. But then you also find these Gilded Age mansions, and I think that is the thing, that unexpected piece, because they're the summer homes of one of the Carnegie brothers. We all know Andrew Carnegie. He was famous for all of his philanthropy and his libraries. And this is a Southern story, so I'm writing about his brother Tommy. And Tommy and his wife bought property on Cumberland, and they built all of these beautiful summer age, or for their summer homes, Gilded Age summer homes, and they're crumbling by the time I'm writing about them in 1959. But the history of that and why they were there and the shape that they're in, the island is now a national park. Some of the Carnegie descendants still live there. And, you put people on an island with a lot of money and not a lot of rules, except the ones they're making up themselves. And then you have the relationships with the people who were there before them and still want access to that place. And so I had all of this history to play with and to think about, and the natural history of that island, and all of these different demographics. And I had to kind of pick and choose, well, where am I going to land with that to write a story that you can hook into, because it was too vast.
That is so fascinating. What a great setup as a writer, like looking in, going like, all right, I have all of these pieces. So, did you do a lot of that pre-work as pre-work? Or were these things that you were uncovering as you were writing the story?
A little bit of both. A lot of it was pre-work, because it was so vast. I had to kind of fish through all of it and decide, okay, where's the character and what parts of this matter to this person, so that I could hone in on that, and it wouldn't just be this monstrosity. Because as a writer, everything is a shiny thing. You're like, oh, this is fun. We can talk about this, and then you find another little piece of history, and ooh, this would be better. Maybe I'll talk about that. I think um, what it came down to was I was reading about the natural setting for Cumberland. And there's a river and a place in the river there, and these places exist all over. But in that river, there is a spot that they call the dividings, where the tide runs both ways. And I'm particularly interested in that idea. And I already touched on this a minute ago when I was talking about the idea of history being something, you need to be able to reflect on your history, and you need to be able to dream about your future. And that, I think, is what makes us human. That is the essence of story. And so I hooked into that idea of that spot in the river and who might be living there. And I went from there with my characters.
Interesting. So, I want to know, how has your writing process changed over time with your different books?
So my first novel was not heavily historical. It's a short read, and it's a much more literary Southern fiction novel. And all three of them do have sort of mother daughter stories. I do write from a female perspective. Um, but that book in particular was a very small. I could look at those two characters in this one little summer, and it was very contained. And I like that about it. The two novels I've written since are very sprawling, and there are generations of people involved. And then this third novel has three different points of view from three different women at different stages of life, and then one of them is flashing back in alternating chapters from 1959 when she is living as a recluse near Cumberland Island, and then 1932 when a tragic event happens. So she's also got chapters where she's a young woman. So it has expanded. My stories still seem to be contained, like over the course of a summer, it's and but then there's this sprawling history that rolls out behind them and around them. I think that has made the books bigger and longer.
Interesting. You actually started answering my next question, which was gonna be, do you find that you're drawn to certain types of story structure, certain themes throughout your writing?
I write about cycles, I think.
Mhm.
um, I think what I'm trying to address is grief. I think I'm also maybe addressing a little bit about survivor's guilt, and motherhood, women's perspectives for sure. But cycles show up, and I think that idea of persistence and this idea that there's not a beginning, there's not an end, and that there is mystery, and that's the best part. Like the mystery is what makes this story good. I don't want to solve the mystery. It's what makes life good, that there's mystery, that there's more to it than we know. So I think those themes are always like bubbling underneath what I'm writing about.
That is so interesting. I love asking that question because I love the variety of answers that I get when I ask it, because everyone has different ways that they
Yeah.
feel about their own work and how they feel that they're processing things through their own work and what their characters are like. So that's very interesting. I like that idea of cycles in writing.
It's all about your subconscious. It's this weird little trick you're playing on yourself. I will write a whole book and not have any idea what it's about until I get to the end. And it's very frustrating because I want to know up front what is the deeper thing that I'm writing about here. And sometimes I'll have an inkling of what that is, and it's frustrating if I can't quite catch it. I talked in another podcast one time pretty recently about catching a story. How do you do that? How do you catch a story? Because that's what we're trying to do, and they just seem like they zip by, and we're just waiting for one. And I don't know how you make that happen. But really, what you're doing is you're trying to get out of your own way because it's all inside you. So it's this subconscious thing that you're wrestling with. What do I really think about this? What do I really remember about this?
Mhm.
What do I feel about this? It's all reaching inward, and we fool ourselves into thinking we're discovering it somewhere outside of ourselves.
Because
So
you're kind
I
of in the place of the reader a lot of the
yeah,
time as you're
it
writing when you're
really is.
discovering that.
You're right. I was today writing in my newsletter about what it feels like to be, just a few days out from this story being released. Right now it's still mine. And I'm just sort of beginning as I'm talking about it to know what I really wrote, what it was really about for me. And once it's released into the world, it's it belongs to the reader. And I'll start to get all this feedback about what it is to the readers. So it becomes like multiple stories. It grows and expands. It's not just the story that I wrote, it becomes something else. And it's always fun to watch it like expand and unfold and see what it really is. I don't know yet.
Now, what is that like for you, watching the book kind of change who it belongs to and not be as much in your hands as it is when you're actively writing it?
I think there's parts of it that you keep secret for yourself as the author to some degree. I'm pretty much an open book. I can't believe I said that. I
It's great. I loved it.
I do tend to be exactly who you think I am. I'm not very good at putting on faces with people or at not being honest in my writing. So it's pretty clear, but it if you're uncomfortable with those things, I think it can be a little scary. And then, the other part of this is that sometimes you don't know what you've written
Mhm.
until a reader reveals it to you. And you think, oh my goodness, I put that in there, and you'll recognize it. You'll know what it comes from inside you or from your experience. And sometimes I'll reveal that, and sometimes I keep it to myself. But it is a it is a strange kind of mirror to stand in front of, to sit with a book club and listen to them talk about what you've created, because it's you. It's you they're talking about, even though they don't know it all the time.
So I want to know a little bit more about how you got started as a writer. Can you tell me a bit about that?
I got started as a writer because I told stories as a kid. I mean, I got in trouble for telling stories as a kid. I got in trouble for telling stories on the playground at school about the playground when it was built had the all of the soil pushed back to the back of the playground, and so there were these hills that had been left
Mhm.
and never flattened out, and there were woods behind the school behind that. In those woods was a sawmill, and we did not know there was a sawmill. As little kids, we could hear it. It was far enough away we could just hear it, but we didn't know what it was. And we would play all over these hills because they weren't kept. They were grown up weedy, but they were open to us to run around on. And I told all the kids that that was a graveyard. And then I told them there was a ghost in the woods. And I thought it was great. I mean, I was coming up with all kinds of stuff. And apparently, I was effective in my storytelling, and I
Oh,
scared some of the kids. And so I had to apologize
I feel
for
like you're
my
telling
story.
me my life story back to me right now
It
because
is.
countless
I
times I'm
know.
like, we're having fun. We're playing pretend together. Don't.
That's right. I had a huge imagination. And I loved to read, and I was always in the library, and I would get left behind in the library when my class would go back and they'd have to find me. So, always loved stories, but I never and language arts fairs. I was winning things for the language
Oh,
arts. In elementary school, I was really that topped out in elementary school. But I never thought that I would publish anything. And I can remember my dad saying, get a job where you'll have good health insurance. And you don't have good health insurance in the arts. And so I became a teacher. And I taught kids with neurological and behavior disorders. And I actually did the first play with those kids at the neighboring children's theater, let us use their stage for that little private school. They'd never done a play before. So it's always been stories and acting and character. And I was a theater major for a year I was a double major education. So you can see it went along hand in hand. But when I had my children, my first two were 16 months apart,
mhm.
and I was crazy, and they would nap, and the internet was new, and I got online and I sent my first email to an author because it was on the back of her paperback novel. And I just wanted to tell her that I liked her book. And we started to talk, and she said, "Have you ever thought about writing a story?" And so I did. And she published my first short story,
Which author was it?
Deborah Smith. She wrote a beautiful novel called A Place to Call Home back in the 90s. She wrote lots of beautiful novels. And then she bought my first novel and published it. And I thought, well, that was easy. I'll write another one. And it took me a long time. And I finally published Eleanor Dare in 2022. So it was almost accidental. It wasn't like I didn't know that I loved to write, but I never thought anybody would publish my work.
Mhm.
And I got lucky. I think I got really lucky.
That is so incredible. And I think that happens so often where people are kind of in that stage of, I know I want to write, I know I love to do this, but not quite seeing the forest through the trees, where it's like,
Yeah.
I know I want to do this, but I'm not necessarily there yet. And that's so inspiring though to hear from somebody who did do it and who did write and now has
And it's
an
not to
author.
say that it wasn't hard because there were a lot of years of submissions.
Mhm.
3 different agents. I'm with my third literary agent, whom I adore, and lots and lots of rejection, lots of revision, rewrites, abandoned manuscripts. It's more or less that you just cannot help yourself. It's a compulsion. So you keep writing. And eventually, hopefully, it connects with somebody.
That is absolutely amazing. I think for any writer, that's the most we can ask for, right?
Yeah. And it doesn't always connect through the publishing either. You have to find ways to connect through the writing process itself. I taught workshops, creativity workshops for other women for a period of time when I wasn't having success actually publishing, so that I would still be writing and so I'd be contributing, and so there was that sharing back and forth of stories because that's really what we crave. It's not, I don't think, as writers, we do measure our success by having published a book. It feels good for the instant that it happens, but the connections are the sharing of the stories back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And so if you can find ways to do that along the way, then the publishing doesn't take on this meaning that just overwhelms everything else so that it sucks all the joy out of it.
Mhm. Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
You know, this has just been the most incredible interview, and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Of course, I loved it.
I just have one more question. I feel like this is like such a powerful place to end it. But what do you have coming up?
So I don't talk a whole lot about when I'm anything that I'm first working on. It's almost like if I look at it straight on, I'll lose it. Like it will dart away. So I have to trick it. I can't know that I'm looking at it yet. I'm working on a book about 2 sisters. They are estranged and they have been living in the same house for 45 years, refusing to speak to one another because of something that happened years ago and a boy that they both loved. It's set in the Blue Ridge. So I'm moving away from the Georgia coast. It's a little bit spooky. It's a little bit Southern Gothic. So it should be fun.
That is fantastic. I wish you all of the luck with writing that and
Thank
all the
you.
joy of publishing and getting this most recent book out there. I hope everyone listening to this goes out and buys all of these books.
Thank you. I hope everyone will come out and see me on book tour and pick up a copy of The Fabled Earth.
Yes, for sure. For Read Between the Lines, my name is Molly Southgate.
Thank you, Molly. I'm Kimberly Brock.
Let's end this the way all great stories end. Happily ever after. The
The
end.
end.
Thank you for listening to Read Between the Lines, a book podcast. You can follow the show on Instagram and Facebook at Read Between the Lines Podcast and on Twitter at RBTL Podcast. Make sure to follow the authors who I've been talking to hear all about their upcoming projects, and also because they're cool people. This show is hosted by me, Molly Southgate, and produced and edited by my dad, Rob Southgate. Read Between the Lines is a Southgate Media Group production, and you can find all the great content put on by the network at southgatemediagroup.com. You can read the story of how I and many other podcasters started in the anthology book Pod Life, which you'll find at the link in the show notes. Also in the show notes are links to buy the books featured on this episode. Using those links supports this show and the incredible authors being interviewed. Have a great week and keep reading.